Welcome to FranCoach's Franchising 101 podcast series. Here we talk about all things franchising. What is it all about? Is it for you? How do you find the best one to own? And so much more. Now your host, Tim Parmeter.
Hello, everyone, and thanks again for tuning in to the latest edition of FranCoach's Franchising 101 series. I am Tim Parmeter, founder and CEO, and your Franchising 101 podcast host. Today, we have one of our franchise partners joining us today. And again, technically not just one. This guest is the founder of one of the really big and upcoming groups of franchises. So we're excited to talk to him about their brands, but also all the different advantages of being in a fantastic group like this. But before we get started, quick reminder of who we are. And FranCoach is a national search firm dedicated to working with individuals like yourself who are interested in owning a franchise. We're partnered with well over 600 of the top franchisors in the country, and that spans nearly 70 industries. Our goal is to help clients find the absolute best franchise for them to own. And the goal of the Franchising 101 podcast is to help educate you on all aspects of franchise ownership. So that's us. Now let's get to the good stuff. And again, this gentleman has been in franchising for a long time. He's a founding partner of Horsepower Brands of Franchises, Mr. Zach Beutler. Zach, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thanks, Tim. It's great to be here.
We appreciate it and excited to talk to you and learn definitely about Horsepower and all of the amazing brands you've got going and all the stuff behind the scenes. But we care about that, but we care more about the people around here. And I love hearing the stories of how people got into franchising. I know you've been in it a while, but give us a little scoop on Zach before we get into Horsepower.
Yeah, for sure. I know my background in franchising, is somewhat unique. I've sat in almost every seat possible. I've been the part-time associate at a franchise, the GM of a franchise, a franchisee, multi-unit franchisee, failed franchisee. I've done franchise development, consulted, and now franchisor. And I think when I look back, I got my start with a company called Complete Nutrition. And Complete Nutrition was a supplement store similar to like a GNC. And the background on that concept was the gentleman that founded it owned the top grossing GNCs in the country and left there to start his own. And when he first opened, a few weeks in, I was walking by the store, and as a freshman in college, I was 18 years old. I walked in and got a part-time job, and 2 weeks later, everybody in the store quit, and I became the manager by default. And looking back on that, I really wasn't the best student and didn't like going to school. And one thing led to another. I ended up taking that one location out of the 5 corporate stores and built up to the top performing location. And I was far younger than the other GM, so I was always kind of the runt of the litter. But I worked hard and I did some things that were a little bit different. And I always try to do things with the end in mind when you look at making ethical decisions. Well, they began to franchise. And during that process, I was a part of the franchise advisory board, which we were building out the franchise. So I got to be a part of that at a young age, and then realized that I wanted to be a franchisee. So I convinced the founder to co-sign an SBA loan. And here I went to move to Tallahassee, Florida, where I didn't know a soul. And I opened up my first franchise right before my 21st birthday. And looking back, what a leap that was. But I was extremely excited. And the first year was a rocket ship, 1.3 million first year open, made a ton of money. And over the next about 2 years, I opened up 6 more locations. And looking back, I was in my early 20s, no business acumen, just great at finding people and great at training sales process, and built that up to about an $8 million business. And then lo and behold, what we finally realized is that your new customer base starts to run out in the weight loss sector. If it works, they quit buying it. And if it doesn't work, they quit buying it. And Amazon came in, bodybuilding.com came in and really flipped that business on its head. And I was personally guaranteed on 7 different leases for 10 years. I was a young kid. I'd signed the paperwork, didn't even look at it. And so I'd filed bankruptcy, lost everything, started over. And at that time, there was a franchisee where I had around 10 locations that I convinced to give me equity in future locations, but I had to do it with a $23,000 salary. So I said, I'll work for this, but I want equity and future growth. And we took that from 10 locations to 68 locations in 3 years and built that up to a $40 million business. And so we were really a franchisor inside of a franchise. We owned 35% of the system at that time. Well, I ended up selling my equity there, and I got into franchise development. And my role was really help emerging brands grow. And the first brand that I worked on was my now business partner, Josh Skolnick. It was his first brand, Monster Tree Service. And I really believe that there are certain people that you're destined to meet and work with. And that was Josh and I. I think we've talked every day for 6 years. And we had a lot of success with that. Then we got into Redbox Plus, which is a portable restroom franchise that we built out. And we were very fortunate to sell both of those concepts to private equity. And that led us down the path to really start our own portfolio company. We had built 2 franchise brands, and we wanted to take that same approach we built 2 franchise brands and ended up selling them to portfolio companies. And we thought, well, we've now built 2 brands out with success. Why don't we become a portfolio company? So we started building emerging franchise brands. And today we have 7 franchise brands with over 1,000 locations across the country. And we've vertically integrated. So we own a lot of the shared services that support our franchisees. And so it's been a wild, crazy, good ride.
That is awesome. Well, and I think though you're with Complete Nutrition, right? Like it kind of has a bad ending, but you were super successful with that. I think it also proves that like you don't have to be, I don't know, like an old person like me that's like, or, well, I've got, this degree and that degree and this certification, that like sometimes just like that hunger and that drive to succeed. And I'm sure you guys have, I'm sure with all of your locations, you've got owners that are in their 20s that are super successful. And I think that's one thing I always want to get people to understand. Like, you don't have to be like old and gray or bald because your hair all came out. You can be young and have that drive to do something yourself, right? So that's a fantastic story. I love that. And kind of, like you said, even a little dumb luck on how you first just walked in the door. So all that's led us here with Horsepower. And I don't want to go in depth on all the brands because that'll take us like 7 different podcasts. But give us like a quick peek. What are the brands that you guys currently have with Horsepower?
Yes, we have a unique acquisition strategy where there are specific requirements on concepts that we want to be in, and then they have to meet those requirements for us to be interested in. So we have 7 franchise concepts today. The first was Mighty Dog Roofing, roofing, siding, windows, gutters, and now solar. That business has around 400 territories across the country and has been very successful. It's now one of the largest roofing companies in North America. Our second brand was Blingle, which is outdoor lighting. So landscape lighting, event lighting, holiday lighting. That one's been an absolute rocket ship and a really fun brand to work on. Our third brand was iFoam Insulation, which is spray foam insulation blow-in for both residential and commercial. That's one of my favorites, to be frank. We have Heroes Lawn Care, which is really 3 franchise brands in one and is geared more towards an absent or semi-absentee investor. And that is pet waste removal, sprinkler repair, as well as fertilization and aeration of the lawn. So the really high margin services. Then we have Gatsby Glass, which is a premier interior glass company. We have Groovy Hues Painting, which is exterior and interior painting for both residential and commercial projects. And then Bumblebee Blinds. Bumblebee Blinds are window coverings for both commercial and residential applications. And so those are our 7 brands that we've launched and built out, and we should have another 2 or 3 brands this year.
Nice. Super exciting. And so was this by design that we've kind of stayed within that essentially kind of that home service realm so far?
Yeah, it's probably a good for me to talk about why we have a home service focus. So all of our brands are in the home service sector, but there are some specific requirements. Like we would never look at a mosquito concept, for an example. The average unit volume is just not high enough for us. So we want concepts that are services that are needed by all, where there's a lot of consumer demand, yet a lot of competition. And we want that competition to be very fragmented, because what better place for franchising to really thrive, where you can leverage a nationally backed yet locally owned company with better systems and processes, better lead acquisition strategy, and you can compete against the mom and pop in an industry where there's a lot of demand. And so when we look at those, there's two other things that have to check the box. And the first is that we need to be able to recruit labor. So for our franchisees, we own a recruiting agency that helps them find their labor source. If we can't assist them in finding their labor, that's something that we would really steer away from, because our franchisees wouldn't be able to build as big as business as possible. And then the other is we also own a digital marketing agency. So when we look at driving lead flow from a digital landscape, it's got to be in an industry that we can drive lead flow from the corporate office as well as in the local market. We've looked at some concepts where the only way to drive leads was to go into the market and figure out who owned a commercial building, and then figure out who that person is, then find them on LinkedIn and then network with them, which isn't necessarily repeatable. So we want large volume-based businesses with services needed by all, with fragmented competition, where we can find the labor and we can find the lead sources for the franchisees.
No, I love it. And a couple of things you talked about, I think, are like the concerns people have right away when they start looking at something, and the competition, like, oh my gosh, the competition, right? Well, especially in home service, it's number one, fragmented. And then if it's mom and pop, it's like, hey, we'll get out there sometime later this week, versus, hey, all the technology that goes by, somebody coming out, told you we'll be there at 10, we're going to be there at 10 o'clock tomorrow, right? And they usually need a really small percentage of what your population is as well. But that labor force comes up a lot, right? So talk a little bit more about that, because I'm sure you guys hear it on your end. We'll hear it with our clients of like, I'd love to do that, but I've never managed somebody that does roofing or glass or insert home service thing here. How would I possibly find them? How would I possibly know that they're the right person? You've brought that in-house to be able to help with people. Do you run across, is that a problem? Were you able to like always be able to help your owners find great people based on those services you have, like inside horsepower?
Well, it's interesting. So you think about a franchisor, it started out as its own mom and pop business, typically 10 or 20 years ago, and how they finally built their business up to a level where they thought it was repeatable and they could scale using franchising. But what they've never done is, they built up a lot of experience in that industry. And then when they launched their franchise locations across the country in different regions of climates, they fail to recognize that most of the franchisees aren't going to have that background. So for us at Horsepower, we are a little bit unique. We do not want people from the industry that the franchise is in. So like our roofing franchise, none of our franchisees came from the industry. They all came into this with zero experience. And so we want people to work on the business, not in the business. So what we have experienced, though, is as franchisees try to scale, when you first start a new business with new people in a new industry, it's a lot to manage regardless. Constantly filling the pipeline and having somebody in the bullpen waiting to go is always difficult. And for a franchisor, there's a lot of joint employer liability for us to assist with the hiring. So we had to make a significant investment into a third-party company that's for-profit, that's non-affiliated, that can help franchisees identify and hire the right people around the country. Now, because we own the franchise brand and we own the recruiting company does this for around $1,000. So you think about a typical recruiting agency would charge you 40% of the 30 to 40% of the salary. I mean, we're doing it for pennies compared to the competition. And we do that because it's a service that helps the franchisee find the right people and scale the business to a much higher level. But I can tell you that, and Josh and I had this conversation frequently where we've never had a problem finding people. It's just something that's always been relatively easy for us. But what I think what helps with us is because we have the recruiting agency, we're filling people a lot faster rate. So we're not having necessarily problems finding them, but for the corporate side, we're finding people at a faster pace than when we did it ourselves. So if we need to replace someone, or lose someone, or we just want to scale, the rate at which we're able to find them is so much faster. And so for a franchisee, they can always have that pipeline and that bullpen built out where they can drive more candidates to them to interview.
Yeah. And you use the phrase bullpen. I always talk about bench. So you were a baseball guy. I was a basketball guy, probably, right? So, but it's like that always be hiring aspect of a franchisee to make sure. And again, people think of it from a turnover perspective because I think the mind goes to the fear side of things first, when really it should be like, what if you have so much stinking business you can't keep up, right? Then you don't want to lose business because you don't have people on your bench in the bullpen. You don't have a pipeline of people you're already talking to for those services, right? Because again, all of the things you've got going on marketing are, again, in the businesses you are seeking out to bring on our horsepower. Like we're not messing around. Like there's going to be business, there's going to be growth. You talk about the lack of industry, not just lack of industry experience. You don't want the industry experience because you want people that are looking to grow big businesses to scale. You've got to be constantly hiring and looking to build that team. So the fact that you guys have that is amazing, because I think a lot of that is just people's fear of kind of the fear of the unknown. I've never hired somebody for X. I've never managed people for X, but you have all of those things in place, right? So, hey everyone, I wanted to take a quick break from our podcast to tell you about our amazing friends at Entrepreneur. If you're looking to become a franchisee or simply learn more about business ownership, and guys, let's be honest, you're listening to the Franchising 101 podcast, so we know you have some interest in this. And I really encourage you to go to entrepreneur.com to check out all of their great content and resources. Seriously, Entrepreneur has everything, all the way from a bookstore to the best podcasts, webinars, and videos, plus information on upcoming events and the latest articles that seriously, they cover all aspects of franchising and business ownership. If you're having trouble deciding which franchise is right for you, start with Entrepreneur's renowned Franchise 500 ranking, which highlights the best franchises of 2022. For 45 years and counting now, Entrepreneur has been and continues to be the most widely recognized and respected authority in the franchise market. Digital and print subscriptions are available, so you never miss out on anything. So seriously, what are you waiting for? Go to entrepreneur.com right now and learn more. You talk about the labor, you talk about the kind of the marketing piece. We'll talk about some of the shared services, the other things that you're able to have, or how a Mighty Dog roofing owner might be able to, also help a local iFoam or Heroes or whatever. Some of the things you guys have in place to help all of those owners really kind of coexist and commingle and use those shared resources.
Well, so I guess I'll back up a little bit. So for Horsepower, we're an aggressive growth-based company, and I've been the franchisee, and I've been the consultant, and I've been the vendor, the franchisee, and the franchisor. And there's always this triangle relationship where when something's not working, the franchisee blames the vendor then tells the franchisee it's the franchisor's fault, and then the vendor tells the franchisor it's the franchisee's fault, and there's no accountability. And so what we experienced after going through a traction or EOS implementation at the franchisor level is we began to hold all of our vendors accountable, just like a department of the company. And after doing that, what we found is that as we were growing, there was this dilution of support to the franchisees happening. And we really realized this with Redbox firsthand, where they were not able to keep up with our growth by the marketing company wasn't staffing up well enough to be able to support the franchisees. Our first call center, couldn't handle the inbound of leads because they weren't hiring fast enough, because they just didn't believe our growth was going to happen that fast. And so that really led us down a path where, to maintain our goal of having 25 concepts by 2025, we knew that we couldn't slow down. So we had to apply not just a monetary amount of capital, but also a lot of intellectual capital at these very complex problems to create solutions for our franchisees. So this led us down the path of acquiring the marketing agency, rebranding it, and launching the first ever commission-free franchise digital agency in the country. So the more the franchisees spend, the more goes back into their markets. We have a call center that specifically focuses on our brands, where the reps are all based out of the United States, and they're really trained on the industries as well as Horsepower brands and our values. We have a recruiting agency that helps franchisees find their own people. Tim, one of the more frustrating things I tell you is that we ordered, I think, 350 F-750 chassis from Ford for one of our brands. And also on top of that, I think over 300 different Sprinter van. And both of those orders were canceled. Well, when you're growing aggressively and you can't find equipment, what on earth are you going to do if your vendors cancel the purchase orders for you? Well, again, we leveraged some capital. We created a dealership model, hired a team that now goes around the country, identifies vehicles, purchases them, manages the build out, and then gets them to the franchisees. And so as we look at all of these services, as we come into a problem, we have a bookkeeping firm at this point that does all of the bookkeeping for the franchisees, that allows us to have proper profitability reporting so that the franchisees can see profitability metrics across the system. And then we have a data management company that does all the analytics, that creates dashboard reporting. And as we've scaled, we're trying to figure out what is going to give the franchisees the most amount of value, what's going to give us the most amount of support to scale quickly and do it the right way, which is where for us to be successful, the franchisees have to be successful. And so when you take all those shared services together, there's complete alignment. If it does not work for the franchisees, they're not generating revenue. If they're not generating revenue, we don't make any royalties, which is our sole source of income. And so we're able to drive a lot better services for lower costs to the franchisees. And I think getting back to the one part of your question, what's exciting today is that we have what's called our Empire Builder program. And so we have our first franchisee that's about to have their third franchise concept, which is their own portfolio. They've created their own portfolio under our portfolio. So this franchisee has three concepts, or about to have their third concept, where they're going to build it up and then take it to private equity and then sell that for a much higher multiple than if they just had one.
Yeah, I think that's the ultimate in scalability. People get, I can have one location or one territory of a franchise. Well, I can have multiple of them. That's awesome. But you can have multiple brands, right? And especially when you're already within the same system with all of those resources that you talked about are absolutely amazing. And I want to go back to one thing you talked about on the marketing that I think most people don't realize is a thing is, I mean, if you're using a third-party marketing agency and you're spending $2,000 a month on whatever, social media ads, pay-per-click, whatever, well, that's how much you're spending. You're paying them to manage that. You're paying that commission. You guys have just dropped that. That's a significant amount of money over the course of a year, let alone 10 years or more, just that you guys have all brought in-house, which is fan-stinking-tastic. So I love that. You have all of these things in place to help owners be successful. Like, do the owners have to do anything? Like, when you look at, I know it's different for each brand, they're not the doer, right? Is there a common theme in traits in an individual that you're looking for to come into any of the horsepower brands?
That's a great question. We've done personality tests and we've done culture indexes, and there's not any way to determine who's going to be the best performer. But I can tell you what's important to us is that we want to work with people that we enjoy working with, number one. We do know that optimistic personalities make better business owners. They're focusing their attention on the positives and growing the business versus all the stuff that's going wrong. So they tend to lean more towards high payoff activities. But I think when you look at what we're doing at Horsepower, we're an aggressive growth, thick-skinned, fast-paced company as a franchisor. And our franchisees have to be somewhat aligned with that. I think one of the biggest things that we have done as a franchisor to improve, or I don't want to say improve success rates, but when we looked back over the last 5 years of all the low performers that we had to have conversations with, what were some of the common themes or common issues? And I remember almost every call, I've been through 2 traction or EOS implementations today, and everyone's been a humbling experience. As I went through that, there were certain things that I knew that were necessary in business. And so one of the first questions I asked a low performer, I was like, can you pull up the scorecard or the metrics that you're tracking week over week for performance so we can see what you're looking at? And the answer would be that they typically don't do that, or they're not measuring anything. They're just checking the bank account or the CRM every day. So that's an issue. The second would be that I'd say, well, what day of the week do you meet with your team to review performance, discuss issues, and solve those issues so that I can attend one to see what's going on? They say, we don't meet regularly. We just typically, we see each other every day, so we talk then. And so as we looked back at that, we realized that we were not doing enough to give franchisees the proper foundation or structure to start their business off correctly. So we now implement traction all the way down at the franchisee level, where they get a scorecard of all of the metrics they should follow and track. They get an org chart of who to hire. What are the key measurables of accountability or performance for those individuals they're going to hire? We do their vision traction organizer, which is their business structure. We help them with their first year revenue goals. We even bring an implementer into the process to train them how to run proper meetings, and even have a software they do it all on. And what I can tell you is that you cannot eliminate the psychological stress of owning a business. I don't think you'll ever get rid of that, but everyone buys a business for a purpose. And that could be monetary or could be for their children. But I can tell you that since we implemented this traction at the franchisee level, our franchisees are getting off the ground with more revenue, and they're doing it at a much faster pace. But what I think is important is they're getting there with less stress. And if you can get people to their financial goals as quickly as possible with the least amount of resistance and stress, that is the goal of any franchisor, I believe. And so if you take what we've learned, we're trying to push this into franchising to get more franchisors on top of this, because franchising needs other franchisors to be successful too. But over 90% of our franchisees are first-time business owners. And this has been one of the best things that we have ever done in the last 5 to 10 years to support franchisees.
Because it's all part of the structure, right? And it's not traction. I'm trying to think of the business book. It's probably behind you, but it's the phrase. It's gradual, then it's all of a sudden, right?
Get a grip. There's get a grip traction.
But again, it's like things slip. They slip, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, holy crap! And if you're not looking at those, and again, I think sometimes people come out of the corporate world and they're a little over the corporate lingo, but some of it is there for a reason. And what are your KPIs? What are your metrics? What's your scoreboard? And you've got to be able to see those things every single day, and to be able to, again, add that into people. I think you guys are, from my experience and certainly talking to you today, like very aware of what's working and what's not. And when something's not working, fixing it versus going, no, that's on you, right? Or sticking your head in the sand, because we all know people or businesses or franchises that will do that. So kudos to you guys for like taking all of those steps to, again, like not mess it around. You're coming in here as an owner of a horsepower brand. You're gonna have that success. There's always stress, right? But you're in control of it. But we're gonna limit that. Make the money, but at the, and I know you know this, that time aspect, right, of controlling your time as a franchise owner, rather than it being controlled by working for somebody else, right? So, super cool, man. And I know you are very, very busy, so I appreciate you taking time to join us today, and definitely want to get some of your team back on to, I don't know, I'll put all the horsepower brands names in a hat and I'll draw one out. We'll have them come back on first. But anything else you would like to share with us that we haven't talked about today? And this is a loaded question about horsepower brands that maybe we haven't talked about.
Well, we're a very unique organization. So, at this point, I don't know there's a database, but we've built more emerging brands than anyone in history, to our knowledge. So we've now built 9 brands from basically one location to beyond 100. And so when you think about joining an emerging brand, you typically get, the innovator type personality or friends and family. And what's exciting is that we're taking really sophisticated, well-capitalized business owners that are now buying these emerging brands. And so everyone knows in franchising that the best practices get developed by franchisees. They're the ones eating, sleeping, and living every day. I mean, we're just seeing this it's exponentially evolving, where one franchisee comes with the best practice, and it's happening so much faster because of the type of accounts we're getting, which makes us special. But because we have, I think, more experience with the emerging brands, we're getting better franchise candidates. And because we're getting better candidates, we're having a more aggressive growth. And that really led us down the path of having to vertically integrate a lot of the shared services. And so there's not many or any other concepts out there that have really taken that type of leap to provide a superior level of support to their franchisees. But we're not for everybody. We're pretty selective on who we work with. We want to make sure that over the 10-year journey that we work with franchisees, that it's an enjoyable experience for not just them but for us too. And so if you haven't had the chance to talk to our franchisees or get in our process. It's fairly unique.
No, super good. Well, and you talk about some of the best practices will come from franchisees only if the franchisor will listen, right? And be open to the fact that maybe they don't know everything about everything. So again, kudos to you guys for that. Because again, you and I both know that doesn't happen. And part of, I know your story and your whys behind horsepower are to, again, make sure that you are creating that experience for everybody. So super cool, man. Zach, I appreciate you coming on and joining us today.
I appreciate you having me, man. It's just exciting. You've been doing this a long time, so I know that you have a lot of trust out there with people.
Well, cool, man. No, I appreciate it, and hopefully we can we'll get offline and try to figure out which horsepower brand we need to come on and give the total spotlight to. But as always, my friend, good talking to you. Thanks so much for joining us today, and for all of our loyal podcast listeners, as always, thanks for tuning in. If you'd like to learn more about potentially becoming a franchise owner, learn a little bit more about this, reach out to us, FranCoach.net, franchising101podcast.net. Again, there's never any fee for our service. So we encourage you to take that first step today towards creating your better tomorrow. Thanks, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for listening to FranCoach's Franchising 101 podcast, where our ultimate goal is to help educate you on all things franchising so you can create your better tomorrow.